Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down a factor that can make or break your October elk hunt: snow or the lack of it. October is a transition month. The rut has burned out, bulls are worn down, and survival instincts are back in full swing. Some years, early snowstorms push elk out of the high country and change everything overnight. Other years, mild weather keeps elk scattered, unpredictable, and hanging in spots that test your patience and your legs. The question we're digging into is this: how do elk move differently in snow years versus no snow years? And more importantly, how do you adjust your hunt to stay on top of them? We're going to cover how elk behavior changes in October, what no snow years really look like in terms of movement and feeding, how snow years trigger immediate shifts in travel and elevation, and how to use these differences to your advantage in scouting, glassing, and boots on the ground tactics. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clear roadmap for adjusting your hunt, whether the mountains are bare or blanketed in white. So why is October different? October is not September. If you go into this month expecting bugles to guide you, herds to be easy to locate, and bulls to act like they did during the rut, you're setting yourself up for a lot of frustration. By October, the chaos of the rut is over. Cows are regrouped in smaller, quieter bands. The big herd bulls that were running themselves ragged a few weeks ago are now depleted and looking for food and cover more than anything else. Younger bulls may still hang nearby the cows, but they're often just as quiet, sliding into survival mode themselves. The main drivers of elk movement in October are recovery, food, and safety. That means the bulls aren't roaming across multiple drainages looking for cows. They're tightening up. They drop into areas with reliable forage, secure bedding, and fewer encounters with hunters. They aren't disappearing, they're just shifting into a different gear. Weather is the wild card that overlays all of this. In a no-snow year, October elk may stay higher, feeding out into meadows or avalanche chutes and using timber as thermal cover during the day. But as soon as snow hits, especially if it's more than just a skiff, it compresses their option. That snow can push them down in elevation, cut off feeding areas, and expose travel corridors. And in years where snow comes early and heavy, you'll see movements that look like migration starting weeks ahead of schedule. So when you step into the October elk woods, you have to wipe the slate clean. Forget the rut. Forget the September playbook. Instead, recognize that this month is about survival, and elk will respond to snow or lack of snow with behaviors that give you clues if you know how to read them. So how do no snow years affect elk movement patterns? When October rolls around and there's no snow in the mountains, elk behavior can feel stubborn. They don't make the dramatic shifts hunters are hoping for. Instead, they often linger in their post-rut zones, and that can make them much harder to pin down. In no snow years, elk are still scattered across a wide range of elevations. Bulls that spent September higher in basins may stay put, especially if feed is holding up and hunting pressure isn't forcing them down. You'll often find them in small pockets of timber near open feeding areas, edges of avalanche chutes, little subalpine meadows, and the shady north-facing slopes where grass and forbs last longer into the fall. The key thing to remember is that in these years, elk don't feel pressured by weather. Their bellies and security dictate their moves, not snow, right? They'll feed longer in the evenings and bed sooner in the mornings, keeping a low profile. Midday, they may shift within timber to take advantage of shade, cover, and thermals, but you won't see the mass movement you do in a snow year. Another challenge in no snow years is visibility. Without tracks in fresh snow, you lose one of the best scouting tools October can give you. Sign is still there, the poop and the fresh trails, but it's harder to read at a distance. That means you've got to glass smarter. Look for those open feeding pockets tucked into rough terrain. Watch how sunlight hits those spots at different times of the day, because that's where elk will slip out briefly to feed. One advantage in no snow conditions is that elk often stay higher longer. That can cut down on hunter pressure if most guys are bailing and heading lower, thinking elk have already moved. If you're willing to grind it out in those steep basins and quiet timber, a lot of times you'll sometimes find bulls right where they finished the rut. They're not advertising their presence, obviously, but they're still there. The downside is that without snow to funnel them, elk are unpredictable. They can bed anywhere that gives them cover and security, and they're less likely to reuse the same trails day after day. That means you've got to be more deliberate with your scouting, slow, methodical, and tune into the subtle clues that give away their patterns. No snow years are patient hunts, right? They require a lot of patience. You won't glass up herds streaming down a ridge or finding trails punched into the white stuff. Instead, you've got to slow down, work the country carefully, and hunt those isolated pockets of feed and cover where elk like to hole up. This episode is brought to you by TideWe and their revolutionary see-through ground hunting blind. If you've ever hunted out of a traditional blind, you know the trade-off. Either you can't see out without cracking a window, or the second you do, you risk being spotted. That's where TideWe's see-through ground blind changes the game. From the inside, you get a full 270-degree field of view through 3 walls of one-way see-through mesh. You can see every movement outside without opening a thing. But from the outside, you stay completely concealed. Game animals can't see in, even when you're sitting just a few feet from them. This blind is fast and simple to use. The pop-up hub system lets you set up or take down in just a couple minutes. Noise-free sliding windows give you multiple shot options without spooking animals. Brush-in loops let you blend it into your surroundings, and the open bottom design makes it easy to stay quiet and comfortable. You can choose between 2 sizes, the 2 to 3 person or the larger 3 to 4 person version like the one I'm using here. And you've also got your choice of 150D or the more durable 300D fabric, so you can pick what fits your style of hunting best. The price of this blind is already phenomenal, but you can get another 18% off by using code BBU18 at checkout. That's BBU18. How do snow years cause immediate elk shifts? When October delivers early snow, everything changes fast, right? Elk are survival-driven animals, and a few inches of snow is enough to kick instincts into gear. While a dusting might not move them far, several inches that stick can push them into different zones almost overnight. The first thing snow does is compress elk habitat. High basins that were still holding scattered bulls in a no-snow year quickly lose their appeal. Forage gets buried, travel gets harder, and thermals shift in ways that make those spots less secure. Elk start moving down to elevations where feed is more accessible and cover is more reliable. This is when migration corridors begin to light up. In heavier snow years, you'll see tracks along ridgelines, saddles, and timbered benches where elk begin funneling toward winter range. Even before a full migration kicks in, bulls and cows alike will stage in transition areas, those middle elevations with a mix of timber for bedding and open parks or meadows for feeding. If you know where those staging zones are, you can get ahead of the movement and catch elk while they're still holding patterns instead of full-on traveling. Snow also makes elk more predictable in how they move. Trails become more obvious. You can see where they're coming out of timber to feed, where they're crossing ridges, and where they're bedding in thicker cover. Every fresh snowfall resets the map, and if you're paying attention, you can stay right on top of them. Another big advantage of snow is visibility, obviously, right? Elk stand out on a white landscape and glassing becomes more efficient. You can scan a hillside and pick out animals that would have blended perfectly into dry grass or dark timber just a week before. Tracks also tell you what you missed. If you glassed a basin in the morning and find it full of fresh tracks that afternoon, you know you're in the right zone and just need to adjust your timing. But snow also changes elk behavior in ways that can frustrate hunters. Elk often become more nocturnal, feeding hard at night when the cover of darkness feels safest. They'll bed sooner in the morning and stay put longer during the day, especially if hunting pressure stacks on top of the weather. That means your window to catch them on their feet may shrink, and you've got to be disciplined about getting into position before first light and sitting longer than you want to during midday. The bottom line here is that snow simplifies some things and complicates others. It narrows where elk can be, makes their sign easier to read, and can speed up their transitions to lower country. But it also demands you be quick to adapt, ready to hunt fresh sign as soon as it shows up, and willing to follow those shifts as elk abandon one zone and slide into the next. Let's make sure we understand elk travel corridors and elevation changes. Whether it's a snow year or a dry one, October elk are defined by movement between feed, bedding, and safety. The difference is in how visible and consistent that movement becomes, and that's where travel corridors and elevation shifts give you the biggest clues. In no snow years, elk often stay put in their post-rut ranges, right? They might linger in higher basins or mid-elevation benches, moving short distances between food and cover. Now, travel corridors in these conditions are subtle. Faint trails worn into timber ridges, side hill routes connecting one pocket of feed to another. They don't look like highways, and elk may not use them daily. That's what makes them so tough. You've got to slow down and pick apart the country, looking for those quiet connections that don't stand out unless you really study the terrain. Snow years flip that equation, right? Even a few inches create obvious trails. Corridors that were invisible a week earlier suddenly look like elk superhighways. You'll see where herds are crossing saddles, dropping off of ridges and working into valleys. And when snow stacks up, it forces elk lower, often in big groups. Those travel routes can become the most reliable way to predict where they'll be tomorrow based on where they move today. Elevation is the other big factor. In no snow Octobers, elk may still be bedding at 10,000 feet if the feed is good and pressure is light. But in snow years, that option disappears fast. They'll drop into mid-elevation timber, benches, and drainages that still have green grass and secure cover. Once storms pile up, elk may even move into the foothills earlier than most hunters expect, staging on winter range transitions well before rifle seasons hit full swing. The key for hunters is recognizing how elevation ties directly into movement. In a dry year, don't abandon the high country just because it's October. Bulls may still be holed up where they finished the rut. In a snow year, don't waste time up top once feed is covered up. Instead, shift your focus to those middle elevation corridors, timbered saddles, creek bottoms, and benches that connect bedding to feed. One of the best tactics is to glass these corridors at first light and last light, then follow up with boots on the ground. If you're seeing consistent sign, set up where elk are naturally funneled, between a bedding ridge and a feeding meadow, or where a trail crosses a narrow saddle. If the sign disappears overnight, don't waste days hoping they'll circle back. They're moving and you need to move with them. October elk hunting is all about staying ahead of those elevation shifts. No snow means scattered patterns and patience hunts. Snow means compression, concentration, and movement. Either way, travel corridors are the arteries of elk behavior, and learning to read them in changing conditions is what puts you in bow or rifle range on the right hillside. I want you to know elk feeding priorities and thermal cover. By October, food and recovery are at the center of every elk's decision. The rut has burned thousands of calories, bulls have lost a ton of weight, and cows are rebuilding after breeding stress and to prepare for that calf inside of them. Whether it's a snow year or a dry year, elk are driven to find calories, and where they choose to get them will look different depending on those conditions. In no snow years, forage is still available across a wide range of elevations. High country grasses and forbs may still be hanging on in shaded meadows or avalanche chutes, while mid-mountain parks and timber edges provide pockets of green. Elk take advantage of these scattered food sources, often moving less overall. They'll feed longer into the evening and sometimes slip out earlier in the morning, but once the sun rises, they're quick to retreat into dark timber or thick north-facing slopes. Without snow pushing them, they can afford to be choosy, grazing in smaller pockets, nibbling here and there, and bedding close to their food sources instead of traveling a long ways. In snow years, the menu changes overnight. Even a modest snowfall covers up delicate forbs and grasses in the high basins. Elk are forced to find accessible feed lower down. They shift towards south-facing slopes where snow melts faster and exposes grass, or they drop into creek bottoms and open benches where food isn't buried. Shrubs and woody browse also become a bigger part of their diet overall as grasses disappear. When storms stack up, elk begin feeding heavily in staging areas closer to winter range where they can consume energy and still put on weight. Thermal cover is the second part of the equation. In October, without snow, elk still prioritize shade and security over warmth. They'll bed in thick cover, especially in north-facing slopes where cooler temperatures and cover keep them comfortable during warmer afternoons. But once snow sets in, thermal cover becomes critical. Cold nights and biting winds drive elk into timber that shields them from exposure. South-facing bedding slopes become more attractive on frigid mornings, while dense timber with overhead canopy helps them stay dry and conserve heat during storms. For hunters, understanding this food cover balance is everything. In a dry October, you'll want to glass those hidden meadows, small avalanche chutes, and edges of high basins for brief feeding activity. In snowy conditions, focus your efforts on mid to low elevation south slopes, creek bottoms, and benches where elk can still access grass and escape the worst of the cold. The biggest mistake a lot of hunters make is assuming elk will always be in the same places regardless of the snow, but their priorities definitely shift with every change in weather. No snow equals scattered feeding and short movements. Snow equals concentrated feeding and longer movements between bedding and forage. When you hunt with that in mind, you start looking in the right places before everybody else catches up. How do elk deal with pressure and their survival mode this time of year? Elk aren't just dealing with weather, right? They're dealing with hunters. And by this point in the season, they've been pressured for weeks. Archery hunters have chased them through September. Muzzleloader or rifle hunters are hitting the woods depending on the state. And human activity in general has taught them to tighten up. In no snow years, pressure compounds the difficulty of locating elk. Without weather pushing them into predictable corridors, elk respond primarily to hunter pressure. That means they slide into deeper, darker timber, bed in nasty pockets most guys overlook or don't want to go, and become less vocal by the day. They'll often move more at night, slipping out to feed under the cover of darkness and returning to their bedding zones long before first light. You might glass a meadow that looks perfect with all the right signs, but never see an elk there in daylight. That's the pressure factor at work. In snow years, pressure and weather collide. Snow already forces elk to move and concentrate, and hunter pressure and elk become hypersensitive, right? They may abandon good food areas after a single blown stalk or shot. They'll still use predictable travel corridors, but they'll shift to heavier cover and more remote drainages if they sense danger stacking up. This is why in snow conditions, you'll often find tracks leading into rugged timber patches where elk hunker down for days, avoiding exposed areas until conditions stabilize. One big thing to keep in mind here is that pressured elk in October rarely make reckless moves. During the rut, bulls sometimes push through pressure because breeding drives them, right? In October, though, survival is the only priority. That means once they feel hunted, they'll relocate to zones that are harder to access, steeper ridges, deadfall-choked basins, or private land edges. Once they're bumped, getting a second chance can be tough. For hunters, the lesson here is discipline. In no snow years, don't waste your time hammering obvious meadows or glassing the same empty basin day after day. Instead, push into overlooked pockets, micro drainages, or benches tucked away from pressure. In snow years, treat every move like it matters. Hunt slow, watch the wind, and avoid educating elk that are already feeling pressure from the storm. The reality in October is that elk don't tolerate mistakes. When pressure piles on top of snow or when dry conditions keep them scattered, they're already on edge. If you're sloppy with your approach, loud on the ridge, or careless with your wind, you'll be hunting ghost country by the end of the day. The guys who fill tags in October are the ones who understand that elk in survival mode are always looking for the quietest, safest, least pressured option. If you can be the hunter who finds those places and hunt them carefully, you'll still have opportunities when everyone else is talking about how the elk disappeared. What are some scouting and glassing adjustments you need to make? One of the biggest differences between snow years and no snow years in October is how you scout and glass. The tools are the same: binoculars, spotting scope, boots on the ground, but how you use them changes with conditions. In no snow years, scouting becomes a grind of patience and precision. With elk scattered and less predictable, you're not going to glass up big herds feeding out into obvious meadows. Instead, you've got to key in on the little details. Open avalanche chutes tucked behind timber, right? High alpine benches with lingering green feed, or isolated pockets of grass on north-facing slopes. These are the spots you glass. You'll need to sit longer behind the glass because you're watching for a flicker of movement or a bull slipping out for just a few minutes before daylight fades. Boot scouting is just as critical in dry Octobers. Tracks and poop are your indicators since you won't have snow to make trails obvious. That means slowing down, reading the ground carefully, and piecing together fresh sign. If you find a lot of fresh sign in one little tight pocket, paired with tracks that aren't weathered, you found a bull's recovery zone. In snow years, the job gets both easier and harder. Easier because snow reveals everything. Tracks, trails, and bedding depressions in the snow can tell you exactly where elk have been and how recently. Glassing also becomes more efficient. Dark elk stand out against white backgrounds, and movement is easier to catch even at long range. You can glass more country, cover more ground with your optics, and be confident you're not overlooking animals that are blending into brown hillsides. But it's harder too because everyone else gets the same advantage. Those tracks you're following might have another hunter on them tomorrow. Elk that are easy to glass from a road or trailhead will be pressured fast. The adjustment is to push beyond the obvious vantage points. Use snow to find where elk are moving, then get ahead of them in less pressured zones, side drainages, off-trail saddles, or timbered benches. One tactic I've leaned on heavily in snowy Octobers is glassing transitions at first light. Elk often feed heavily during the night and begin traveling back toward bedding areas as the sun rises. If you're on a vantage where you can watch those moves, you can intercept them on their trails. Without snow, those transitions are harder to see, but with snow, they play out like a story on the hillside. Scouting in October boils down to this. In no snow years, you're hunting sign and subtlety. In snow years, you're hunting patterns written plainly across the landscape. Both demand time, patience, and the discipline to go where most guys aren't willing to sit. Next, I want to cover a few practical hunting tactics here with you. All the theory about snow versus no snow on October only matters if you can turn it into boots on the ground decisions. This is where hunts are won or lost, when you choose how to move, where to sit, and how much ground to cover. In no snow years, patience and precision are your allies. Elk are scattered, quiet, and feeding in small, isolated pockets. The best tactic is to slow down and hunt methodically. Glass from high vantage points, but don't expect to see big herds. Instead, watch for subtle movement, an antler tip flickering in the timber, or a cow slipping across an opening at first light. Once you've identified a pocket of elk, don't charge in. Circle the wind, use terrain for cover, and move deliberately. These hunts often come down to ambush set along quiet side hill trails or feeding edges where elk move short distances between bedding and food. In snow years, the pace changes. Elk are on the move and you need to match that with your hunting style. Tracks in fresh snow tell you where they've been, and if you cut a hot trail, follow it carefully with wind in your favor. Don't rush. You're not chasing them down. You're shadowing them until they stop to bed or feed. When you spot those travel corridors being used daily, set up on them. Saddles, benches, and creek bottoms where trails converge can become high odds ambush spots once snow has elk funneled down. Glassing is often more productive in snow years, right? Instead of burning days trying to pick elk out of brown hillsides, you can scan wide basins quickly and see them moving against the white. Use that to your advantage. Cover more ground with your optics, but be ready to move fast when you spot elk on the move toward new country. One universal tactic in October, snow or not, is discipline with wind and noise. By this point in the season, elk have been hunted hard and they don't tolerate mistakes with wind. In dry years, that means they slip deeper into timber at the first sign of trouble. In snowy years, it means they abandon a whole drainage. Either way, you don't get many second chances. Slow down, hunt smart, and remember that every stalk is high stakes. Finally, don't overlook timing. In no-snow Octobers, elk often feed later into the evening. Evening hunts can be productive if you can slip into a meadow edge or timber opening quietly. In snowy years, elk often feed more at night and move at dawn, so mornings become critical. Be in position before light, glassing or waiting along travel routes because your shot window may only be a few minutes before they vanish into the thick cover. The practical truth is this: October elk hunts aren't about running ridges or chasing bugles anymore. They're about adapting. Hunt slow and methodical in no-snow years. Hunt mobile and responsive in snow years. If you adjust your tactics to the conditions, you'll be an elk when others are still wondering where they went. October elk hunting is a season of change. In no-snow years, elk stay scattered, holding high and tight in post-rut pockets where patience and careful scouting become your biggest tools. In snow years, the mountain itself reshapes their patterns, forcing them down, exposing travel corridors, and concentrating movement you can read like a map if you're paying attention. The hunters who succeed in October are the ones who adapt. They don't cling to September strategies or hope elk will behave the same regardless of weather. They know elk are in survival mode and they adjust scouting, glassing, and hunting tactics to match those conditions. No snow means slow, methodical hunts focused on isolated pockets of feed and cover. Snow means reading tracks, watching travel routes, and getting ahead of elk as they shift elevation. The most common mistake hunters make this time of year is assuming elk disappear. The truth is they never vanish. They just move differently depending on whether the mountains are bare or blanketed in white. If you adjust with them, you're going to stay in the game long after other hunters have given up. If you want to go deeper into strategies like this, beyond what I share here publicly, then it's time to step into Team Backbone. This is the inner circle for hunters who want more from their gear, their training, and themselves. Inside Team Backbone, you'll get 20% off site-wide for gear and apparel, a member-only t-shirt mailed to you every month that you can't get anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault with mindset training, backcountry strategy, gear planning, fitness programming, guides, and more, entry into exclusive monthly gear giveaways, access to the private Team Backbone Facebook group where you can connect with me and other driven hunters directly, and for Team Elite members, direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice. This isn't just a membership, it's a movement. It's for guys who train for the hunt, thrive on challenge, and want to surround themselves with a tribe that pushes them forward. Check it out, join the team, and let's keep building together at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.